Razor Blackenborrough here again, narrating for Jet Black, whose light-skinned ass seems to think that he is some midnight black mandingo warrior straight out of the Gambia. Jet Black is that light-skinned brother that always forgets he's light-skinned and sometimes even tells light-skinned jokes to his son and daughters. They're just jokes, since Jet doesn't dislike anyone at all for any genetic reasons, but if you know that guy in your circle of friends that always forgets how he looks, Jet Black is that guy in his own circle. Anyway, our reason for recording this has been to give clarity in the division of the black nationalities and the gender war's role in it, and to give credit for each side in this where credit is due. When it comes to delineation, this is a type of distinction, and that part is necessary for races in general, because no race is completely united anyway, nor is that race the sole identification for any cultural groups. Latin Americans come in nationalities with different dialects, and we know this. They don't always agree, but they won't let a non-Latino divide them unless it is a Wyatt. Ask the Thai and the Cambodians right now about their border dispute. Do they need a non-Asian involved in this? Would they tolerate it? So it would behoove black people to remember that racial unity doesn't actually exist among people in general, and this isn't a failing of our race. However, Wyatts from Western Europe will cooperate to make sure no one with a melanin count beyond their own will ever tell them what to do. They have a very purposeful but conditional unity, which is more of a cooperation that results in the ease of intermarriage between them, but they don't have the same racial unity we imagine they have. Latin Americans and Asians share a level of Wyatt worship in common, as does the majority of the world, but neither of these two are actually monolithic, let alone united with each themselves. They simply agree on many things regarding our race specifically, especially with regards to the concept of becoming more like us. Neither of them really has smoke for Master Charlie Colonizer, and many Southeast Asians are the only ones to not have a beef with our race for being black. Yet and still, the delineation of the FBA within the black race is a necessity, but it has also been done already. We have not denied the blackness of other nationalities, but we have also understood the cultural differences they claim and of which they tell us. Being a black Brazilian means to go through a lot of the struggles that FBA experienced in North America. And we will have a lot in common once we can understand each other's languages. We have been through the same Wyatt colonizer, and we have had the same varying reactions to him, from selling out to revolutionary resistance. There are Sambo sellouts in both nationalities, and there are revolutionaries who have set up communities away from these colonizers and learned martial arts to evade recapture, just as there have been in Jamaica. Maroons in Jamaica went from revolution to returning runaways to the colonizers. Ibrahim Traoré has taken up the revolution from Thomas Sankara, who himself was betrayed by a Sambo that Thomas Sankara's dad raised as Thomas's brother. Sankara and Traoré aren't sellouts by any stretch of the imagination. Neither FBA Jamaican nor Burkinabe would imagine either of those two being Sambos. Yet, in Africa at large, as well as in the Americas, non-blacks who open up retail businesses among black populations enjoy a success that we would never allow a black retailer to enjoy for any reason. Whether it's a Lebanese store owner in Senegal, or a Chinese Jamaican store owner in Montego Bay, or an Indian gas station owner in Baltimore, they don't have to go through the same nightmares as any black person of any nationality that dares to open the same business among his own race. My close friend Black Johnson opened a business along with a Bahamian American, and they both had to hide their ownership of the store from black and white clientele alike, because whites wouldn't buy from a darky, let alone two, no matter their nationality, and black folks wouldn't pay market price to them, no matter their nationality. This is a racial problem we have, not a national or cultural one. That's it. Black folks in general are still too quick to behold with awe non-black people and their systems. That doesn't change much with nationality. That changes more with gender than nationality. And Jet Black's own wife said as much this last weekend to him. Black populations as a race are going to need to know our commonalities and distinctions alike, which we'll only learn by cooperation and communication. We will have to think of our race as a new nation simply because other races have forced us into nationalistic concerns that plague other nation-states, like a common security or external relations with others, more than they plague other races. In thinking of the race as a nation, we will have to think of the nationalities within the race as African Americans would think of Alabama and Delaware within the USA, or as Nigerians would think of Edo and Kaduna states in their nation. This will organize our diversity by which we often find ourselves overwhelmed. Certain things are handled at the state or provincial level, and other things are handled at the federal level, and this is true in any nation. In the event that states or provinces have legal conflicts, the Supreme Courts of most nations handle those conflicts once they file their grievances, preempting the need for violence and civil war, hopefully. Question: what do a mestizo in Monterrey and a Brahmin in Jaipur have in common other than their assumption that white is right and black is on the bottom? They can't understand each other without someone learning another language. They don't dress the same, nor do they eat the same. Turn off the air conditioning, and they won't smell the same to each other either, because their diets are different. These differences are very normal, and they aren't likely to hate each other at all, but to ridicule each other at some times easily. However, they think they are born with an instinct to either fear or look down on not only our race, but also those of their own races who share a melanin count with us. They don't think that this is something they have to learn over time. They think it's a universal human instinct, and they even think that we have the same instinct to see them as superior to ourselves. They think they were born this way because they can't remember their infancy in which race was as individual as a human face or fingerprint. Black unity on an emotional level might be a pipe dream of the Pan-Africanists of any nationalities within our race. But black cooperation and common defense are necessities for dealing with humanity as a whole, though, because other races let Satan whisper anti-blackness and white supremacy into their minds. Black people will not all like each other, let alone love each other, because there isn't a race for which like and love are universal within itself. However, there is a race for which almost every other race has an opposition, with a few exceptions in Latin America and in Southeast Asia. That race is ours. There are people who don't think much of us positively or negatively. There are people who want better for us than we think they do. However, recent decades have also taught us that many other non-whites view us just as their white colonizers view us, despite their begging whites to not view them the same way. We are hyper-aware of this pattern now, even to the point we will assume that a nationality or group can't even be neutral to us anymore. If we're hyper-aware of this, then how are we out here so ready to divide our own race on the basis of nationality instead of on the basis of loyalty versus Sambo psychologies? No one in this recording is blaming us for learning and recording both our commonalities and our distinctions. But Jet Black and I blame the race for one evil commonality of our various tribes and nationalities. That commonality is our proclivity to divide ourselves unnecessarily and even unaffordably. This is not something that only African Americans or only Jamaicans or only Nigerians have done. Many of us of various lineages are very eager to push away other lineages from within our race, and this isn't affordable for us. Yet we, as a race, are easily duped into this. Even Dennis Sperling, who advocates for suing African nations but hasn't named one Wyatt jurisdiction yet to sue, doesn't actually hate other black folks. Hatred isn't his issue, but that level of division is not something our people can afford. Honestly. If African nations owed FBA, then they owe black Brazilians too, along with the rest of Africa's diaspora in the Americas. Now, Attorney Sperling might admit that, but then who owes these modern-day Africans who also lost contact with us, diasporan cousins of theirs, because of the greed of some common ancestors of ours? Won't these nations need to collect reparations from the colonizers who drew the modern-day borders on any map of Africa since the year 1884? Colonization appears to the morally rational to have been more than sufficient a punishment for some Africans' cooperation with European slave forts on the coast. Do they really owe us what they haven't yet collected, while those who owe them and us are off of the hook? Or do they also deserve from the same oppressors the same thing which Sperling seeks to extract from them, as if they never suffered for what their traitors did to both of us? We don't ask Sperling to belittle the FBA culture or experience, but to simply place the other nationalities of black people above those Wyatts who think their ancestors' oppression of everyone else was justified. A Nigerian will say that the slave trade was unfortunate, but that Wyatt will tell you he doesn't think his ancestors, who shot original Americans to take their land and bought Africans to replace them in bondage, did anything wrong, even though he would never tolerate this done to him, even if it was punishment for crimes he actually committed. Even those who suffer white guilt aren't about to give up their inherited gains in the form of reparations for us. Also, even though Sperling has only said that we FBA have an understanding with Wyatt America, he hasn't said we're friends, and we aren't. But there are too many FBAs that still think that friendship with Wyatt America is okay. And who will confuse a suspension of hostility from Wyatt America with friendship, when in fact many of you believe in a scripture that tells oppressed people to come out of their oppressors, calling their oppressors whores of Babylon? Even those whom the divisive follow are calling for far less than what the followers are doing. Next, I will tell you that as a Muslim, I am not allowed to side with oppressors against their victims. Therefore, I am not allowed to side with non-FBA who diss us wrongly and call us lazy or criminals categorically, just as I am not allowed to side with a Sambo who is FBA as she or he insults non-American black people categorically. Those black folks who are Muslim of various nationalities are actually as close to Pan-African or pro-black as you can get, minus those who imitate Arabs and seek to be colorblind. And this type is very rare and very easy to spot by speech and dress anyway. The rest of us are good with each other. We're calling out the non-black Muslims for trying to hide their racism and sneak it in. That Gambian imam is my brother. And if he disagrees with something about us FBA, but he doesn't dehumanize us when he disagrees, and he understands my right to disagree with a practice of theirs too, then he isn't a Sambo sellout bastard. His sister isn't a problem, unless she is bleaching her skin and wearing wigs, which she will either do or refuse to do because of her character, not because of her nationality. Even when she bleaches, she shares that bad habit and its cause with the Jamaican, Haitian, FBA sister, or Nigerian who bleaches and wears wigs. She won't choose to do it or not because she's Gambian, but if she really knows her religion, she won't imitate any oppressor or his women anyway. Her faith and her ignorance of it or knowledge of it will have far more to do with her choice than her nationality or her parents. That said, I will say this to a few people from the home continent who really seem to forget that FBAs are equal to other nationalities of black people. You are a disgrace to even other continental Africans who don't mistreat us like that or forget our humanity. You really like to talk down on someone, and you find FBAs to be a convenient target. The reasons you give aren't unique to us, though. You'll say that Bob Marley is a real African, but that we FBAs are like little white people with slightly darker skin. But Bob's own father was a Wyatt. and his mother was a daughter of a two-parent household with an educated, proud black father that taught her better than to be a Wyatt's bedwench, and she still fornicated with that plantation overseer. I'm not making that up. He was literally a plantation overseer, according to historical sources. If Bob Marley was FBA, you'd have called him a fraud and a CIA plant, probably. You'll use Caribbean's black folks to try and put us down as less authentically African and black, but the Caribbeans have the same family names as we FBAs if they're from an Anglophone Caribbean nation. Lisa Ray's ex-husband, a former finance minister of Turks and Caicos, has an English last name, not one from the continent. Do you think that he grew up speaking Lingala at home and eating jollof rice for lunch? He grew up speaking English, eating the foods that were influenced from the home continent but not capable of being identical, just like we Africans who became the Gulf Coast Creoles later and had to come up with jambalaya because we didn't have the exact same ingredients in the swamps that we had back home in Senegambia. The very things you have to say about us as FBA wind up applying to our cousins in the Caribbean nations too, who weren't allowed to keep their names or languages any more than we were in North America. Some of you might say that the black Brazilians are your brothers, and we would agree, but that neither of you are ours, which is historically inaccurate. You might say that you understand them in Portuguese more easily than you understand us in AAVE, but in reality, you both speak a European language that you have successfully Africanized in various ways, just as we Anglophone descendants of Africa on both sides of the Atlantic have Africanized English by necessity. Some of you will visit a Caribbean island and then come away disgusted when you realize that those nations have the same variety of personalities that FBA people have, from prime ministers to criminals, just like the nations you or your parents left to live stateside. You'll say they're lost too, just like the FBA after you thought they were oh so African and pure. Yeah, you can get your chain snatched in Kingston as easily as you would in Memphis, but some of you assumed that the violent crime rate there would be as low as it is in Accra. Nope. Also, to the FBA, allow me to point out the timing of this division, not the delineation, but the division itself. This happened at the same time that black nations across the Atlantic, without the mediation of the African Union, began to accept each other's passports for visits without visas or for visas on arrival. This was to facilitate travel between black nations in the Caribbean and on the continent, a wet dream of Marcus Garvey and later of his former foe, William Du Bois. Truth is, reparations in the USA is an FBA issue, to be fair and exact, but the call for this exclusion of other black folks came from a so-called sister that values white vagina over black penis, and if the situation were reversed, there is no way that this would have gotten any traction. We have always delineated based on nationality across our race. However, could a black man who had a white lover of either gender convince black American women to divide themselves from their sisters of other passports instead of recruiting them into the Western gynocracy? We have never not delineated based on nationality nor on tribe within nationality when such was possible. My own wife's home country fought a civil war based on tribes within one nationality that shared one language and one religion they didn't take seriously. This was beyond delineation, but where division led them, despite that no one openly said that their goal was to cause a tribal war. So this call has to be scrutinized not because delineation or distinction is wrong, but because that which already occurs doesn't have to be called for again. When a car is already running on idle and you turn the ignition again as if to start it again, it harms the ignition. This is that call at a time like this from a source like its source. What reason does she have to really call for this, knowing that the least nuanced among our own nationality will take that call and then divide beyond the call, beyond the necessity, and even beyond benefit and affordability? Well, that reason is quite simple. Another black commonality, with the exceptions of FBA and South Africans, is that we don't tolerate her private lifestyle. That's why. Some might not resort to violence against it, and some might because the black world is diverse, but we don't approve of it as a race. There you have it. The motive is sexual and not heterosexual either, and the acceptance of this is hypocritically gynocentric. Of course, we as black men have been trained to not judge sisters for that lifestyle, while accepting that they judge us for anything and use that same lifestyle to accuse us when we don't even live it. This isn't an accident. Jet Black told you that the division isn't independent of the gender war, and the hypocrisy of our gender war is itself a psyop, an act of psychological warfare. We can address the disrespect provoked by Sambos of any nationality and citizenship, and we have already, without her help or the interference of her rainbow community that itself isn't led by its own members, but by hetero elites who themselves want to see our race gender confused even more than the already existent rainbow alphabet population. Black unity and even the more realistic black cooperation and mutual defense are fearsome ideas to white supremacists and even to many non-blacks who don't hate us, but fear us still. Yet and still, at a time when this cooperation is increasing, we fell for a call to restart an engine that is already running. Malcolm X, an FBA hero of an FBA dad and island mother, who reached out to our cousins of other nationalities with no unrealistic dreams of love, but a realistic goal of cooperation and mutual defense, told us that we lost our minds in Africa and told us that we had been hoodwinked, bamboozled, run amok, led astray, tricked and deceived. Just as he told us back then, we didn't land on the rock of delineation, but rather the boulder of intra-racial division once again landed on us. I sincerely hope this helps. Thanks for listening again, my people. Black heart, black mind, blackout. Assalamu alaikum and black heterosexual non-select male power just because these misandrists don't like it, and black patriarchy until extinction or judgment day. Thank you again for flying with Jet Black Air, where the phrase jet black is also a verb. Keep jetting black with us until the wings and the wheels fall off. Gender and racial justice forever.